Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and as part of my indie highlights, I'd like to talk about the upcoming ARPG Darkhaven. It's being developed by Moonbeast Productions, which was founded by and includes a lot of the original creators of Diablo and Diablo 2, as well as Torchlight 1 and 2. I've had my eye on Darkhaven for a while now because Diablo 2 is one of my all-time favorite games that I still play today in the form of the remaster, so I'm always looking for a game that feels more like the older generation of ARPGs, because those are the ones I personally enjoy. And from what I've seen so far, Darkhaven very much appeals to my preferences. So I'm sharing my experience of the demo with you because I think a lot of people would like Darkhaven if they give it a chance. The demo is up on Steam if you'd like to try it for yourself. I'm also making this video now because the devs have a Kickstarter campaign that's still going until March 21st, so if you like what you see, I'd recommend supporting them over there. I personally pledged at the Vanguard tier, which is $30 and gets you the game plus a couple extra things, which to me feels like a very reasonable price for a great ARPG. At the time of writing this, they're at about $340,000 out of their goal of $500,000. I really hope they reach their goal because I'm loving what Darkhaven is doing, both in terms of retaining the design and feel of older ARPGs and also innovating in unexpected ways that I'll talk about later. You can feel that the devs actually care about making an ARPG that feels fun, not whatever Blizzard is doing these days, which is trying to get people to buy as many battle passes, cosmetics, and DLCs as possible. Before we get into the video, I'll take a moment to say a special thank you to my members. I appreciate all of you so much, and your support allows me to keep going. Joining as a member would help the channel a lot, but of course only do so if you want to and if you can afford it. I'm always grateful, even if you just like the video, if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment. Let's start with an overview of what Darkhaven is and wants to be, as well as what you can expect from the demo. Darkhaven is a dark fantasy isometric ARPG set in a post-apocalyptic world. You're a survivor in a world where the wildlands and monsters have reclaimed the ruins of long-dead empires. Obviously, the story setup doesn't matter all that much, or at least it doesn't in my opinion, since this type of ARPG has always been first and foremost focused on gameplay. But I do like the concept personally because a post-apocalypse in a fantasy setting is far more interesting than the regular fantasy story of, oh, there's lots of towns and cities of humans and they're fighting this big war against the big bad evil creatures. And to me, it's also far more interesting than a sci-fi post-apocalypse. In terms of gameplay, you can expect the usual things, learn and upgrade your skills and loot powerful items, but Darkhaven also adds something new to the mix, which is that the way you move and position your character in combat matters a lot, and they encourage this more tactical playstyle by having dashes as well as jumping, including a cool double jump. This is by far the thing that feels most fresh and fun to play around with out of the whole demo. I admit I was jumping around far more than I should have, just because I could, and because it looked cool when my character did a front flip whenever I double jumped. There isn't any hard end to the demo, but the character progression caps out at level 8. But don't worry, you have plenty that you can do until reaching level 8, and you can keep playing around even after you've hit the level cap. There's only one character class in the demo, the Witch, with 6 available skills and 3 skill trees, 2 for each tree. I will say the skills felt a little limited, especially because of the level cap and fairly slow progression, which meant that you couldn't really spread out your skill points to try out more skills and fill out your ability bar. I'm sure that in the full game there will be far more skills, but these limitations did make the demo feel a bit slow, much slower than D2 for example. There is also a world event called the Necropolis, which is triggered by following the main quest. This event is really cool because it transforms your world by corrupting it. Like it actually changes the landscape and adds more undead enemies. And it will keep being like that until you stop the Necromancer at the heart of it. These kinds of events are something the devs want to add more of in the full game, world events that overtake entire regions or even the full map, scars left on the terrain from battles you have with enemies, settlements that can fall, that kind of thing. In the demo, the Necropolis spreads to consume everything if you don't stop it in time. I am all for this. It's amazing to have terrain that changes over time either due to events or player and enemy actions. It adds variety to what will usually feel like quite a static world in a regular ARPG. This demo is a bit weird in the sense that it's not one of those polished demos that you'd expect to see on Steam. This is actually a build of the game that the devs are continuously working on to improve, and because of that you'll see that there's a bunch of issues and rough edges. So do keep this in mind if you play it for yourself. This is more like a pre-early access kind of experience, not a demo that's put out a few months before release to show you the best of the game so that you can add it to your wishlist. The devs are planning on releasing Darkhaven fairly soon into early access after the Kickstarter, if it's successful, and I hope it will be. And they seem to be committed to developing this while receiving and incorporating feedback from players, so if you're a big ARPG fan, I think this is definitely a game to keep a close eye on. But yes, Darkhaven is very interesting. World-altering events, terrain that's affected by the player fighting or exploring, and combat and exploration that are made more fun and fresh by the addition of dashing and jumping, and swimming. You'll also be able to build stuff in the full game, raising the earth to create islands, fortifying defensive positions, and constructing everything from bridges to entire settlements. I only saw the option to build some walls in the demo, but I'm sure more will be added in time. I'm not sure how their world generation works, but they say that they use ecological rules to stitch together biomes. So far from what I saw in the demo, it feels pretty nice to explore the overworld because there is a decent amount of biome variance, even though obviously this is a small demo, so I'm happy with what I've seen so far in terms of that. By the way, because I know people will be interested in single-player and multiplayer details, yes, you'll be able to play this solo, co-op, or even go into PvP worlds. Darkhaven will have persistent online worlds where your progress and impact on the land remain, and you'll be able to play with multiple people. I'm unsure how many players per world. That will be something they go into more detail at a later date, I'm assuming. Now let's talk about gameplay. The coolest features for me were the changing environments as well as the extra movement options, the ability to dash, jump, double jump, and swim. Even if you don't have a lot of time to play through the full story of the demo, do yourself a favor and run around the overworld and experience this kind of movement. Because after getting to feel how fun it is for my character to have this much freedom, I want every ARPG to be like this. There's even properties on items which give you extra stamina, which gives you an extra dash, or water walking, which does exactly what you'd expect. And it's extremely useful since while you're swimming you can't attack enemies, but if you're just walking on the water, you can attack, dash, and use whatever other abilities you have freely. By the way, there is also a day-night cycle, which immediately makes things look more interesting because it changes the way the environment looks just because of the lighting. And on top of that, there are also more dangerous enemies that roam the world at night. The item design is done very well even within the limited scope of this demo. Sometimes you will prefer magic blue items over rare yellow ones because they may have stats that you care about more, or they'll have more sockets. And a legendary item isn't necessarily better than a rare one. It depends on whether the special property and other bonuses are actually useful to you. In my opinion, this is a really good sign for the item design of the full game, but I guess I should have expected this to be the case since these are some of the original devs of Diablo 2. So if you like the way items work in D2, this will be somewhat familiar, although you will have these new and interesting types of bonuses to work with as well, not just the usual fare. I spent quite a bit of time looking at the magic and rare items I looted, and also tried to figure out when to add gems and creature parts to the socketed gear. By the way, once you get the puzzle box, you can use it similar to Kanai's cube from Diablo 2 and upgrade 3 gems of the same type to the next tier. I'm unsure if you can do anything else with the puzzle box since there wasn't any tutorial that I could see related to it. Even if that's the only thing to use it for now, I'm sure there will be various recipes to craft items and do other funky stuff with it just like Kanai's cube. The devs have also said they'll be building on their past work with the next generation of relics, runes, and rune wards, and set items, so I'm going to be very interested to see what exactly they will do with these types of items later on. Rune wards and set items are some of my favorite things from Diablo, so I can't wait to play around with these things in the full version of Darkhaven. There's quite a bit of enemy variety, and that combined with the procedurally generated world makes for a fun leveling and exploration experience. I think you gain XP a bit too slowly for my taste, especially because the max level is 8, so you don't get a lot of points to make a build with. But I understand that the devs probably kept the progression at a slower pace so that the players would play for longer and give more detailed feedback on what they like and dislike about the gameplay. Because if you only play for half an hour to get to level 8, you won't really experience enough of the style of gameplay that Darkhaven is going for to form a proper opinion on it. I've personally played the demo for 5 hours, and there's still a lot of stuff I haven't done, like for example I haven't even managed to defeat the Necromancer yet. Though to be fair, I'm not the most skilled gamer, so it doesn't surprise me that it's a difficult event for me to complete with the level cap of the demo and limited abilities. Speaking of abilities, there's only one class, the Witch, which has a total of 6 skills that can be learned and upgraded. Out of everything the demo has to offer, this was the greatest weakness for me. I enjoy trying out different builds in ARPGs and also having the freedom to combine more skills instead of using only 1 or 2. Because of the level cap and the slow leveling, I feel like I have to keep investing in the skill I start with, plus a second one that's more of a support skill. I never touched the other skills for either of my 2 characters. The first one had Bloodlash and Shadow Walk, and the second one had Feast for Crows and Shadow Walk. By far, Shadow Walk has felt like one of those skills that you want to have on any build, because it's a teleport, and those are just always useful. See the teleport staves that people buy in Diablo 2, and it also has the added benefit of doing a little damage and CCing enemies. So it's a bit too good. I'm not going to talk about all the skills because obviously this is a pre-alpha build, just a proof of concept, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot more design work to be done for the Witch class as well as for whatever other classes they will add to the full game. There's also a building feature, but so far it seems to be limited to constructing walls. I only tried it out a little bit and then panic built some walls to contain the lava that was flowing down when I accidentally broke the stone holding it back while fighting some enemies in the cave. But as I understand, there will be a dedicated building mechanic in the full game which is meant to let you create settlements, fortifications, and all sorts of things. I'm very curious about what that will look like because I can't quite picture it from the wall building that is currently available. Will there be quests to create houses or workspaces or full settlements for NPCs that we save during our adventures? Will we be able to create workstations for crafting and upgrading items? I admit I'm not usually a fan of the survival crafting open world games out there because they're a bit too open-ended for me, and I feel overwhelmed with the choices I have. So I hope that the devs will add certain objectives and slowly open the building feature over time as we progress through the game, because otherwise it might just end up being something that I don't engage with much. But this is pretty much all I had to say about the gameplay. Overall, it's been fun enough that I spent over 5 hours in the demo and didn't even realize I'd played for that long, and that's exactly what I want out of an ARPG. Moving on to the visuals and sound, this is a bit of a weak part of this demo, but again, keep in mind this is a proof of concept in very early development and not a polished demo. I personally don't mind that the visuals aren't super amazing. They're perfectly fine for me as long as they get polished up a little more with some extra lighting effects and shadows, but I'm the kind of person who mostly replays older games and who doesn't care for realistic graphics at all, so it'll be up to you whether you'll like this visual style even when it's fully polished up. The sound is the thing that I was more disappointed with because I'm used to the amazing music and sound design from the Diablo games, which has remained a highlight even in the newer Diablos no matter what other issues those newer titles have. First and foremost, to get one thing out of the way here, the music was great. In fact, it reminded me quite a bit of Diablo 2 music, so for me that's a big plus. There were only a few tracks though, so it got a bit repetitive. But I'm sure that in the full version of Darkhaven, there will be plenty of tracks, so it'll be nice. What actually disappointed me about the sound design were the monster and loot sounds. Diablo has absolutely iconic sounds, especially the sounds whenever various types of items drop on the ground, and Darkhaven just doesn't have that. None of the enemy noises were particularly noteworthy either, and I know that obviously the devs have focused on the gameplay mostly, so that this actually feels good to play and showcases what kind of ARPG they're working towards, but I really hope they'll rework the sounds and sound effects and add a lot more polish to this area of the game because, for me, it is a very important element that makes an ARPG more enjoyable if it's done well. Moving on to performance, I was surprised to find that, especially for the pre-alpha nature of this demo, I didn't actually have any issues to speak of. The game never crashed, I never got stuck anywhere, nor did I notice anything egregious. There were some moments where the game stuttered, like for example when I fast traveled between waypoints and the terrain had a moment where it seemed like it was still generating after I'd loaded in, but overall this felt like a very stable version to play, and I could enjoy what the demo had to offer without having to struggle with any technical difficulties. Here are my closing thoughts on Darkhaven. I think this has the potential to become a beloved ARPG, at least for the community of players who still play Diablo 2 or Diablo 2 Resurrected. This is not as casual-friendly as something like Diablo 4 is, I don't think, though the demo had a bunch of difficulties including easier ones than the one I was playing on, so potentially that will be appealing for casual ARPG gamers. I'm definitely part of the target audience, as are all the fans of D2, so I hope this game will find its player base and succeed, because I think it's doing a lot of very cool new things in the genre. I am curious about certain aspects of the full game that they haven't fully talked about yet, such as how exactly the different classes will work. They've mentioned that there's going to be 3 skill trees that you can combine to create your own unique class. I'm unsure if we're going to be able to choose 3 trees out of a bunch of them, or if there will be preset classes that have 3 skill trees each, and maybe some of them overlap between classes. On Kickstarter, they said that before they launch in early access, they wanted to add a male choice for the witch class, as well as more skills and other class options, so I would assume there's going to be at least 2 classes, if not 3, when early access begins. Obviously, they're adding more NPCs and quests, more monsters, and more biomes and environmental events, but that's all to be expected. But the thing I'm most curious about is the class system, and I hope the devs will make a video or blog post or something to talk about their plans for this in the near future. I think even just showing some concept art and early design stuff they have for the other classes would be great, so that we can get a better sense of what the game will be like. The reason I'm extremely interested in the class and skill progression is because, as I mentioned in the gameplay section, it did get a little boring to only use 2 main skills in the demo, and I want to know that the devs are planning for a more complex build to be possible and actually supported by the system and item design in the full game. In terms of less impactful things, I'd also like to know if they're planning on creating cinematics or cutscenes, special visual scenes that happen at certain points in the most important quests, because that is something that I expect from a Diablo-like game. While the story in ARPGs has never really been all that interesting, I have always enjoyed the cutscenes that play in between the acts of the main quest, and I'd love to see something similar in Darkhaven as well. They don't have to be super high-quality CGI cinematics. Personally, I'd be very happy with concept art-looking scenes that are slightly animated, as long as they have good voice acting and music in the background, and they show off something cool. Just for the vibes, you know? As for some personal little wishes for the game, I'd love to see shrines that give you temporary buffs and special powers, events you can find scattered around the world, and especially in dungeons and caves like the cursed shrines and chests from Diablo 3, and for my final wish, some type of loot goblins. I love encountering goblins in Diablo 3, I always get excited to see what's going to drop when I kill them. In D4 they're kind of whatever, but then again D4 is just kind of whatever in general for me. On a more serious note, I want to see a pretty wide selection of class archetypes. Right now we have the Witch, which acts like a sorcerer warlock. I want to see a rogue assassin type of class, a barbarian kind of warrior. I've always loved monks, so a martial arts class would be cool. Plus, if it fits the setting, a holy class like a paladin has always been one of my favorites as well. And let's not forget a druidic class that can shapeshift or summon animals, as well as a necromancer. Obviously, that's a lot of classes, and I don't expect the 1.0 release to have all of them. It would be totally fine to have some as later additions and expansions or updates, but I think that at the very least there should be 4 or 5 of these classes or archetypes in 1.0, just so that there's enough variety for everyone's tastes. In any case, these have been my thoughts on the upcoming ARPG Darkhaven, developed by some of the devs behind the original Diablo games. I'm very excited for this, and I hope it manages to get funded on Kickstarter because it would be a damn shame if a cool project like this doesn't end up seeing the light of day due to lack of funding. I hope you found this indie highlight interesting and that maybe I've stoked your interest in Darkhaven. If you enjoyed this, stick around for future reviews, highlights, guides, and discussion videos I plan to make about games I care about, mostly RPGs. Feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe, or maybe become a channel member. Everything helps. This has been B-Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.